Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 2 of On Queer Street, the replacement pod for the next big pod, which, as far as I am aware, has gone into some sort of hibernation. Very pleased to be joined to kick off the new year by Mr. Rian Scalia. Rian, am I pronouncing your name correctly, first of all? Because I wasn't sure if it was Rian or Ryan or whatever, so can you correct me on that?
You pronounced it perfectly.
Sorry.
You pronounced it perfectly.
Perfectly. Okay. Excellent. What a great start. So, Mr. Rian Scalia, thank you very much for joining us. We will be haven't done a show for about a month or so because Christmas sort of took over from mid-December onwards, and it was all a bit chaotic. So we're going to be wrapping up the last week or so of 2016. And I appreciate, Ryan, you did a fair bit of this on Sunday with the asylum, so we won't spend too long on it. But we'll wrap that up, and then we'll get on to our year-end awards, and then look ahead to the rest of January. And there's actually been quite a lot of fights announced in the last sort of 48 hours or whatever. Pacquiao fights, Ricky Burns, etc. So we'll get onto that a bit later and give our thoughts on sort of the 12 months to come. Before we go any further, though, I will give the question out, and I'll also put it in the chat. 6 Degrees of Tony Dodson. For anyone who missed the first episode and isn't sure how to play, the game is very similar to 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon, the Hollywood game where you have to link film stars via sort of common actors that they've acted with in movies. This is pretty similar. You start off with fighter A and you have to link them to fighter B via common opponents. So to give you an example, if you wanted to go Muhammad Ali to I always try and think of a terrible Tyson. Kevin McBride. There you go. Muhammad Ali to Kevin McBride. You'd go Ali to what's his face? Larry Holmes to Tyson, and then Tyson to McBride, and that will be 3 stages. Obviously, that's quite easy. I'm going to try and make them harder and harder each week. But the fun of this is that there are a million different answers. So for this week's question is, everyone get their pencils ready. John Wayne Hibbert, the famed Southern Area title challenger. John Wayne Hibbert to Edwin Valero, 27-0, 27 knockouts, world champion for about 3 years, I think, back a few years back, 5 or 6 years back. So that's John Wayne Hibbert to Edwin Valero. And I want that in no more than 5 stages. So everyone, I'll tweet that out as well. Everyone can have a go at that and then send me their answers throughout the show. And we will come back to that at the end. Right, Ryan, sorry about that. Just a bit of housekeeping. Japanese cards. I was on holiday for the final week of 2016 and into 2017. So I was sort of watching bits and pieces on my laptop. I didn't really watch much of it live. I actually did see the Ioka fight. Against the Stamp, he's Thai, isn't he? I'm guessing with that name. Yeah. I did see him. Thought that was quite a good little fight. Obviously, not the most meaningful. I don't know where you want to start off with. How about should we start off with who were you most impressed by of all the winners over the 2 days? Was there anyone that really stood out?
Well, I'd say it's got to be Naoya Inoue, just because he stopped Kohei Kono, who's never been stopped and has fought a lot of really good fighters, and the way he did it too, on a counter left hook like that, it was really impressive. So I think Naoya is a good way to start.
Yeah, Inoue was good again, wasn't he? It was good that his hands have held up. I was, you're always worried, aren't you, that he'll fight once on New Year's Eve and then he'll be out again for another 9 months or so with the hands. But I'll be honest, I thought Kono had retired before this. I don't know why. I know he's got to be, 36 or something, or 37, something like that. I mean, good performance, but, I think everything was set up for him to get the KO. But like you say, Kono's very tough. I remember that fight against, who was it? Kameda, Koki Kameda, was it? The one on Showtime a couple of years ago? And
yeah, in Chicago.
Yeah, that was a good performance. I think that if anyone wants to know what Kono was all about, I think that's a good fight to watch. He's a real grinder, a guy who throws a lot of punches, comes forward, a proper sort of relentless sort of whirlwind on the inside. Not the biggest puncher, but a guy who really beats you down with volume. And in a way, from what I saw, and yeah, Ryan, let me know your thoughts as well. He seemed to sort of soak up a lot of the pressure early, and then sort of gradually put his foot down. And I was actually quite impressed with his defense and his kind of defensive mindedness, I suppose, in the first few rounds. Whereas in past fights, he's blown opponents away, and he hasn't really had to worry too much about defense. Did you see any sort of new levels to his game in this performance?
Well, I think what you've seen in Inouye's last 3 fights against Carmona, against the Thai, and against Kono is he's fighting come forward fighters, and he's kind of just blocking, with the gloves and arms, blocking the shots and shelling up. And I mean, sometimes, especially against the Thai and against Carmona, they were getting through at times, but I mean, it wasn't really phasing him at all. And so, I mean, he's using pretty basic methods of defense, just to avoid like the opponent's barrage, and then give his own back, which his is obviously going to be much more devastating to the opponent. I mean, Kono was able to sneak through sometimes, but it was
He
once
never
now,
hurt him, did he?
right. And then once now he felt like stepping on the gas. Kono was reeling every single time. So, I mean, yeah, I thought it was pretty impressive. I mean, against better guys like Quadras and Chocolatito, I don't think he would be able to get away with that, shell defense and kind of straight line movement sometimes.
I know what you mean. I think I'm not saying he'd be out of his depth, but I think he'd be in for a bit of a shock if he was going to fight, say, the winner of Quadras Gonzalez, the rematch. Has that been signed, by the way? I keep hearing conflicting things. I'm sure I read like a month ago that it was a done deal, and now I'm reading that they're still negotiating, or there's not enough money, or whatever. I don't know if has it been signed? Is it confirmed?
No, Chocolatito is going to fight Srisaket on the Golovkin-Jacobs card, and after that, there's nothing set. I mean, the WBC is kind of somewhat ordering him to fight Quadras after this, which I mean, in the first place, they were kind of ordering a rematch between Chocolatito and Quadras, but instead he's fighting his mandatory Srisaket, who's been mandatory for like 2 years. So I imagine that the Quadras fight will happen after this fight, because the first fight was really good, and it's a fight HBO wants. But obviously, Chocolatito isn't happy with the money being offered for that fight.
I've got to say, I'm not that impressed with. For years, we were saying, right, that the flyweights and the guys below that were completely kind of starved out of earning top money. And it was, who was the guy? Was it I think the last guy to get sort of, haven't there only been a handful that have ever got $1 million paydays sort of below sort of bantamweight? There's very, very few guys. I'm sure Dougie Fisher once did an article about some guy in the 80s got $1 million, didn't he, or something at flyweight? He was like the only one ever. So
Carvajal and Gonzalez.
Yeah, possibly, or was it? It might have been Danny Romero or something like that. Got sort of $750,000 or whatever it was back in the 90s, and that was considered like a record-breaking purse for the division. And I can understand that they feel like welterweights get $1 million to fight bums, which is true a lot of the time. But the minute Chocolatito started earning 300,000, 500,000, whatever it is, I feel like every single guy in that division is now demanding extortionate money. I mean, wasn't Estrada asked for? Didn't he want $1 million each to fight Gonzalez? He wanted each guy to get $1 million. I've heard that Quadras is asking for $500,000 for the rematch. I've heard all these crazy numbers flying around, and you just think like the fighters really don't help themselves sometimes. I mean, Gonzalez Quadras won. That was the biggest audience that a flyweight fight has. That must be one of the biggest audiences, TV audiences, a flyweight fight's ever had, like in recent years at least. And it seems like already they're kind of pricing them, or they're leaning towards pricing themselves out of of further dates on TV, and it would be a real shame if HBO end up saying, well, sorry, we can't put the competitive fights on because the guys are asking for too much money. We can only air the mandatories or the the kind of the lesser the more kind of mismatchy fights, like you say, like Gonzalez against his mandatory. I mean, I've not seen that guy before. I imagine that's a lot cheaper than the Quadras rematch would be. But I hope they think a bit longer term, and you don't have the likes of Inoue demanding crazy money to come to the US. Or, I mean, I think Estrada's got no interest in any of the top fights really. If you look at the guys he's fought in the last couple of years, we'll get onto that a bit later. But I feel like he's been pricing himself out for quite a while, and I don't know. I'm a bit worried that they're getting a bit greedy down there. Although you hate to begrudge them earning some money, but at the same time, you've got to be realistic. Like HBO cannot come up with $2 million for a flyweight fight. It's just not going to happen. The interest isn't there. Although maybe on the pay-per-view undercard, I don't know. Jacobs Golovkin, I've no idea how it's going to sell. Really, maybe 150,000, something like that. I don't know. Maybe less. Maybe there's an upside and the guys will get paid well. You hope so, but at the same time, some of the noises coming out from the flyweights recently have sort of been turning me off a little bit, and I feel like they're getting a bit carried away with the interest in the division. Just moving down that card slightly, was there anyone else in particular that impressed you? I mean, I saw that Oguni beat Jonathan Guzman. That was I think Oguni was about 5-1 underdog, something like that, before the fight. Obviously, that was a big upset. I remember, I think I'd seen Guzman a few times before. I remember the Wake fight from last year where people seem to think that he was sort of beating Wake from pillar to post, which he was to an extent. But Guzman was also pretty marked up by the end of that fight. And, you got the sense that he was there to be hit, and it seemed like Oguni was catching him a fair bit. And didn't he knocked him down, didn't he? I think in the mid rounds.
Yeah, Oguni knocked him down with a left hook to the body in the third round, and then I believe it was the 11th round, he knocked him down again with a body shot, and the referee didn't call it.
Oh, and it was, but he still took the decision. I mean, yeah, I was kind of tuning in and out of that one. I had it sort of on while I was walking around the flat, and I thought it seemed like the right guy won, but it was competitive. I mean, I wouldn't say no to a rematch. I don't think, I wouldn't turn my nose up at that. Corrales Uchiyama, obviously probably the end for Uchiyama. First of all, how did you score that one? Because I thought it was pretty close. I mean, maybe a 7-5 type decision and then maybe just 1 point in it with the knockdown.
Yeah, I don't think Uchiyama did enough to win, which is unfortunate, because I think if he would have just stopped hesitating and just would have thrown his hands more, I think he probably could have knocked him out, or at the very least, maybe scored another knockdown or won some more rounds. And I think, he could have won the fight that way, because he was just hesitating too much to throw, especially in the later rounds when, Corrales was reeling and was tired. He just wasn't going on the attack enough to exploit that. And, Corrales banked enough of the early rounds really to get the decision.
Uchiyama seemed very, very wary of the left hand that hit him in the first fight. Understandably, really. But yeah, I agree with you. I thought he was a bit nervous, and maybe that's a sign of a guy getting old, that he was a bit tentative. Sort of reminded me in a weird way of well, I guess not Vlad against Fury so much, but that kind of symptom of a guy who's sort of a little bit scared to let his hands go. And a bit unsure of what's coming back. And obviously he knew that he could be badly hurt by Corrales. Where would you like to see Corrales go next? I mean, I'm assuming there won't be a third fight.
I mean, I'd like to see a unification with Lomachenko. That's possible because Corrales is the real WBA champion, so he can do unifications. I mean, Lomachenko, that one was thrown around in the past, when Lomachenko, before he fought Walters, Corrales was an opponent that was in the mix to fight him. So I think that would be a good fight. I mean, I don't know when Lomachenko is going to fight next, probably March or April. I imagine it could be announced pretty soon with the way the announcements have been flying in the past 48 hours. But I think that
Yeah.
would be a good fight, Lomachenko against Corrales.
And they keep the one I saw mentioned the other day was Gary Russell yet again talking about the rematch. I mean, he's been talking about the rematch with Lomachenko for about the last 18 months without any real desire to actually fight him. Again, I think maybe he's just promoting his fight. I think who's he fighting? The guy who beat Castellanos, Escandon. He's fighting him. That's a fairly easy win for Russell, I think. He's a short guy. Do you think he could move up? I mean, this interview, he was talking about wanting to go up to 130, and he said, "Look, before I retire, I'm not interested in, he said, I'm less interested in unifying the division than I am in avenging my defeat." Do you think, first of all, do you think he's serious, and second of all, do you think he'd have any chance in a rematch?
Well, I don't really take Gary Russell seriously. He fights like once in a blue moon, and he was talking like he's like, oh, I only want like 3 or 5 more fights or something, and then I'm done. Like he doesn't really sound like he has any ambition in boxing. He just wants to fight like once a year and pick up a paycheck and then bounce. And so I don't really take the guy seriously, especially when he's calling out people and then like going on the shelf and not fighting. So I don't really put much stock into what he says.
Yeah, it's a shame, isn't it? Because I felt he could have had a bit of momentum after the Gonzalez win, and there were some really makeable fights. He could have fought a guy like Mares, or he could have fought, I don't know, someone like Lee Selby. He's desperate for a big fight. And then, that's without taking the promotional divide into account. I'd love to see, I think Valdez against Russell would be a fantastic style matchup. I think that could potentially be a real sort of knockdowns all over the place, a really, really exciting fight. I don't know who I'd pick to win, to be honest. Possibly Russell, because I think he's quite a lot faster. But that would be a fantastic fight. But, they never get mentioned, do they? And Russell seems happy to just fight mandatories once every 18 months and then disappear. And it is a bit of a shame because, Lomachenko, he's going to beat everyone else. I mean, the Russell rematch isn't terrible if there's no one else to fight. I mean, if he can't get Vargas or Salido or whoever else, if you believe Aram that Salido doesn't want the rematch and is asking for, extortionate money, another guy asking for $1 million, apparently. Don't know if it's true, but we'll get on to what Aram's saying a bit later. But yeah, as an aside, if anyone ever wants to sort of amuse themselves, if you try and dig up an interview with Gary Russell where he talks about the Lomachenko fight, it's quite extraordinary. The amount of excuses he comes out with to explain that loss. I listened to one, I think it was with Fight News or one of the YouTube channels, and I counted, honestly, sort of double figures in terms of excuses. There were sort of 12, 15 different excuses: illness, being tired, having personal issues, the referee being poor, his corner not having the right game plan, his strength and conditioning being bad, distractions outside the ring, managerial issues. He literally blames absolutely everything for that loss. And he finished the interview by saying, Lomachenko should be embarrassed that he didn't stop me, considering how distracted I was going into that fight. And I think if the only way you can criticize your opponent is that they didn't knock you out, it's a bit of a you're on kind of shaky ground. It's a bit of a strange way to denigrate the opponent. But Lomachenko doesn't really seem interested. I don't think he's ever mentioned Russell's name again since. So, he calls the shots, I guess. But yes, just to finish up on this Japanese stuff before we go on, I wanted to ask what you think is going on with Murata. Because again, I saw him way down the undercard fighting an 8-rounder or whatever it was. I actually forget who the opponent was. I'll get it up now.
Bruno Sandoval.
Yeah, but Murata was a real sort of, Aram was really keen on him 3 years ago, and he just doesn't seem to have really, 12-0, 9 knockouts, decent enough record. He fought fucking Comanche Boy 6 months ago, who was getting knocked out by Delvin Rodriguez in like 2012. The opponent, I mean, he's 30, so it's not as if he's got loads of time. I don't understand. I know he's had some injuries, but he seems to be really stagnating. And I'd like to see him get a push personally. I think he's quite a talented fighter. I'd love to see him in a sort of a fringe kind of middleweight middleweight level fight, maybe against a guy like Rosado, or I don't know, a guy like I mean, there's not middleweight so thin at the moment, isn't it? I don't know, maybe a guy like Willie Munro, maybe someone like that. Even Korobov, Curtis Stevens, people like this. I'd like to see him get a bit of a push. What are your thoughts on him? Have you watched much of his career so far?
Well, I think I've watched every single one of his fights. I mean, the thing about Murata is I'm pretty sure they want Billy Joe Saunders this year. You know, especially it makes sense. You know, the
He's ranked with the
WBO,
WBO, isn't he, Murata?
yeah,
Yeah.
and the WBO, it's Warren Boxing Organization and whatever Bob orders. So those are the two main WBO promoters, and you know they do whatever they want with the WBO, and it just seems like it would make a lot of sense for that fight to happen. You know,
Right, I'm going to tweet that out. That's our first prediction for the year. Saunders versus Murata coming.
yeah, I could definitely see it happen.
Makes perfect sense to me. That that's the type of defense where I'm sure Saunders would fancy it because he'd think Murata was inexperienced and all the rest of it. And to be honest, I think Aaron would send him to the UK, wouldn't he? It's not like he's a cash cow.
Right, right. Like I think Saunders would probably win it. Just
Yeah.
Murata really isn't. He doesn't look anything special, really.
He doesn't. I mean, he looks to have a bit of power. He's got pretty good technique. I agree with you. He's kind of 7 out of 10 in every department without having anything exceptional. And my worry is that he's just not necessarily, for a gold medalist and a guy who was very, very hyped. I just don't think he's been developed very well, and he doesn't appear to be learning much or improving very much. And it's a bit of a concern because, like you say, he turned over when he was, I think, when he was 27, and he's 30 now. And they should put their foot down and get a move on. But Saunders versus Murata, I like that a lot, and I think that kind of makes sense for both sides. So I might go to that if that's anywhere near London. Wouldn't mind seeing probably be a sort of fairly dull, maybe an 8-4 type decision for Saunders. But yeah, not a bad one. That's an interesting shout. Right, anyone else on the Japanese cards? Not really for me. I guess we'll move on to year-end awards, because I know you and I have been disagreeing on a couple of these, especially about prospects and all the rest of it. Prediction for, sorry, I'm just tweeting this Murata thing out so I don't forget. Right, so first of all, did you agree largely with the consensus on Fighter of the Year for 2016? I mean, most people seem to give it to Frampton. I didn't have a problem with that. What was your thoughts?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, he beat Quigg and he beat Santa Cruz, and he did it, in Quigg's backyard, and he did it in Santa Cruz's country. Even though there were more Irish there than Santa Cruz fans, he still went across the Atlantic to beat him. And those are two very good wins. So I'd have Frampton. I could see some want to give it to Ward. I mean, obviously the Kovalev win on his resume is like better than anyone else's win this year, but I thought Kovalev won the fight. So that's why I wouldn't really want to give it to Ward.
It's tricky, isn't it? Because I mean, I'm sure I can't think of any examples, but I'm sure there are past years when the Fighter of the Year has been in controversial wins before. I mean, a lot of people thought the first Maidana Mayweather fight was a draw, or that Maidana might have narrowly won it, or examples like that where a fighter might have been in a very, very close fight and still sort of gone on to pick up Fighter of the Year honors. I agree with you. I just don't see how Ward beat Kovalev. I just don't see it at all. I think it was a very close fight, but there was one winner, and for that reason, I can't put Ward in there, and also because the other two guys he fought were awful. I mean, okay, Barrera's not awful, but he's a gatekeeper. He's a sort of fringe contender. But yeah, no, we won't go on to Ward Kovalev again because I'll get too annoyed, and we'll just wait. We'll waste the whole rest of the show on it. But yeah, suffice to say, I agree with you that I really struggle to give it to Ward purely because I'm just I sincerely believe that he didn't win. And I've watched it several times, and the best I can do is Kovalev by a point. Just don't see how you can have it any closer than that. But yeah, so fighter of the year, we're agreed that it's Frampton. I mean, Crawford doesn't really have a claim, I don't think, just because he couldn't get. Postol's a good win, but it's not a great win. And also, he did it. Maybe if he'd gone to the Ukraine and done that to Postol, or if he'd gone to Russia, I know that doesn't really make sense. But Crawford did it all at home, and I think winning on the road does make a big difference. And whatever people say, Frampton's British, and the fight against Quigg was in the UK. The fight against Quigg was in Quigg's hometown, and it was on a Quigg promoted show, and Frampton, clearly won and got the decision. I think being a road warrior counts for a lot in the current climate when there are so many hometown decisions and so many stay at home fighters. Would you also say that? Actually, I'm trying to think if he fought. I think he may have only fought once last year. I'm thinking of Linares and whether he only fought Crawler. I'm not sure if he had another win last year.
Yeah, he only fought Crawler last year.
Yeah, it's a shame. I mean, he fought at the end of 2015, didn't he? But if I make an early shout for this year, if Mikey Garcia beats Zlatikanen, which I think he will, and then goes on to unify and beat Linares again, which I think he will, I think Mikey could be right up there at the end of this year in terms of fighter of the year claims. But obviously that's looking way into the crystal ball. So if we're agreed on Frampton for fighter of the year, I've got no issue with that. What about fight of the year? Because that was very, very subjective. We did our roundup for the Queensberry rules, and I think of the final 4 fights, I think we had a tiebreaker. I think all 4 fights got 2 votes each, and there was a real kind of argument going back and forward, spirited debate. For me, it was Conlon-Nelson. I think that was the best fight by quite a distance and the most exciting. But we had lots of votes for. We had a couple for Santa Cruz versus Frampton, being a very, very high level fight. Even had a vote for Kovalev Ward as fight of the year, which I actually think is quite an interesting shout because it was a very exciting fight in a different sort of way. And then we had what was the other one that won it? Some idiot voted for Porter against Thurman. I don't know what that's doing in the conversation at all. What was your pick, Ryan? Anyway.
Well, I mean, I did pick Conlon versus Nelson as my like most people are picking Salido versus Vargas.
Yeah, that was it. Sorry, and I just
Yeah, I mean, great fight, obviously great fight, but no knockdowns, and the knockdowns are really provide a lot of drama, and especially in Conlon versus Nelson, when you have a bunch of them back and forth, it just makes for a crazy fight. And I think the problem is most people haven't seen the fight outside of the UK. So that's probably why it doesn't get the love. I don't even think it was like the Boxing Writers Association of America didn't even have it on their nominations.
No, and I know what you mean. It's a shame, but I mean, it is always tempting. What was that fight from? Do you remember that fight from about 10 years ago with the 2 Thai guys in it? And it was, people were saying it was like fight of the decade or whatever.
That was in. I think you're talking about the one in France where it was Mahir.
Possibly. Yeah. And they basically said it's right up there with Corrales Castillo and Gatti Ward, and it was almost as good, a real kind of 5-star fight. But loads of people never bothered to watch it because it was 2 guys with names they'd never heard of before, fighting for a title that they'd never, I think they were fighting for like the Asia Pacific title or whatever. And I know what you mean. It does make you. It took me years to watch it because I sort of looked at the names and thought, well, why do I care about those guys? And then eventually got around to watching it and realized how good it was. I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce the names, but I'll put a link to it in the description on the chat. Vargas Salido, agree with you. Good fight. I'd say it's an 8 out of 10 fight. I didn't think it was a classic. I thought Vargas versus what's his name from the year before, Miura was so much better. It was a miles better fight. I think it was a case of we'd hyped it up so much before, hadn't we? Saying this is going to be an absolute war, and then we sort of had to save face and sort of choose it as the fight of the year. I don't agree. I don't think it was. I think I've watched it back once. I probably won't watch it again. Good fight, but it didn't really move the needle too much for me. Oh, I found it. Yeah, Ryan. It was in Paris. You're right. It was Sitchacha Sichachawal versus Monzipur for
Yeah.
the junior flyweight title in 2006. And yeah, another one where I think Dan Rayfield has probably never seen that, and would have
I
gone.
think Dan was actually the one that lobbied to get it on the ballot.
Oh, was he really? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'll take it back then. I apologise because I know he was very dismissive of Conlan Nelson this year, and
Oh,
had sort
really?
of said it wasn't an important fight. And I do think there's a tendency to gravitate towards the big HBO fights, which is it's inevitable, isn't it? It's the same in soccer. If there's a good game at the World Cup, that will always get the game of the year, regardless of all the games in all the leagues around the world, either side of it. Right now, a slightly more interesting one where I think there's a bit more debate was round of the year, and I don't know if there were any that spring out to you. Obviously, it's a bit more of a specific question.
I mean, there aren't really that exactly, stand out, because really there were a lot of good rounds this year. I mean, you can take rounds from the Thomas Williams versus Edwin Rodriguez fight,
Yep.
and Luke Keeler versus Tom Doran. Those are ones that immediately stand out to me, just because they traded knockdowns and both guys looked like they were done, and
Yeah.
they ended up coming back. And you could probably take rounds from the Conlan Nelson fight, or from Hozumi Hasegawa
Yeah.
against Hugo Ruiz.
Well,
One of those rounds. The round before Ruiz retired in the corner.
Yes, well, very funny you say that, because that's exactly the one that we went for in the end. That's what I voted for. Round 9 it was, where Ruiz really hurts Hasegawa and he staggers back against the ropes. And I'm going to contradict myself a little bit here. No knockdowns, but Hasegawa then comes back and lands about 5 flush shots, and Ruiz sort of staggers backwards. And both of them are just, it was sort of Gatti Ward-esque in the sense that neither guy was even attempting to cover up at all, and they were just throwing direct shots. And then obviously Ruiz kind of stumbles back to the corner with a broken nose, sort of blood pouring out of his face, and then retires in the corner. And then I was very sort of, it was nice, I'm not some crazy Hasegawa fan, but I was, it was very nice to see him bow out with a win. I thought, he's a guy who's fought everyone, a guy who's taken some bad losses, but also come through some very tough fights to win as well. And it was I felt like the story of that fight was very satisfying for everyone involved. And also, I think Hasegawa was like an 8-1 underdog or something, huge underdog for that fight. So again, an upset is always good for the ratings. Okay, good. We're pretty much agreed so far, I think. Let's say Hasegawa Ruiz for round of the year. Now, prospect of the year for last year. So this would be a guy I suppose you think has come on the most in the last year. I suppose maybe most improved fighter is a better way to put it.
Well, I wrote an article on UCN Live about this, which I think you saw, and I picked Luis Neri, who is a Mexican bantamweight. He's about 22-0 with 16 knockouts now, and last year he fought 5 times, and he stepped up the competition a bit. He fought David Sanchez, who is a pretty decent fighter, was like interim WBA champion, and he just steamrolled him. And then he steamrolled Raymond Tabogan, who took Gaio Estrada 10 rounds. And the guy's like a destroyer basically. He's a southpaw, really hard puncher, but he can also counterpunch and box and move. And he's only 22, and he only had 9 amateur fights, and he's already this good and improved this much, and he's pretty high up in the WBC rankings, I know. And since his promoter is Zanfer, which works really well with the WBO, so he could probably go that route as well. But like a fight like him versus Yamanaka, I think would be a complete shootout, like Moreno versus Yamanaka. But yeah, mine was Luis Neri.
Yeah, Neri's a good one actually, and I've seen you tweet about him a few times in the last 12 months or so. Here's one for you. And again, not prospect of the year so much as most improved. Would you let me get away with Oscar Valdez? Just because I think he's really gone to the next level in the last 12 months. And obviously he's won a title and he's defended it twice, I think. And to me, Valdez looks like he's really, he's tangibly better than he was a year ago. And has really gone to the next level in terms of his performances. And I actually think you could make a case that Lomachenko's gone up a notch as well. Obviously he was fantastic anyway, but
yeah,
to
as
me,
far as
he seems like he's improved like sort of maybe 5 or 10% in the last year.
yeah, like Valdez, as far as like most improved, I definitely think he could be there because if you remember in, I believe it was June of 2015, Valdez was was like the co-main of an HBO fight at I think it was at the StubHub Center. I'm not sure, but yeah, he was the co-main and he fought a 10-rounder against Ruben Tamayo, I think it was,
and
like
yeah. I slated him after that because I was
got dropped.
Yeah.
He got dropped in that fight, and he didn't look that good, even though he won nearly every round. But he didn't look that good. And then after that fight, he went off HBO and fought some lower level fights, and then came back for the world title shot on the Pacquiao Bradley undercard, I believe it was, and yeah, and since then, I mean, he's looked like he's really improved a lot, especially from that Tamayo performance, his first on HBO.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's exactly what I was thinking, because the Tamayo fight was the one where I kind of thought, okay, maybe this guy's getting a bit overhyped. And then when he beat the absolute piss out of Chris Avalos, I thought, okay, that's what you're supposed to do with a guy like Chris Avalos when you're a very hyped up prospect. And then obviously I saw him against Gradovich and he looked excellent. And again, he did what you're supposed to do with a guy like Gradovich if you're an elite fighter. Yeah, and to me, he now looks like he's no idea if he just had a bad night against Tamayo. Tamayo's not a terrible fighter, but he's a kind of NABO level guy. And yeah, you shouldn't be getting dropped and kind of getting into a sort of life and death with a guy like Tamayo if you're going to be the next big thing. But if you put him in with Tamayo now, I'm sure he'd probably get rid of him in a couple of rounds. And to me, he looks ready to fight anyone in that division. And like I said earlier, I'd love to see the Russell fight, but also the Selby fight would be great as well. I think he might knock Selby out. I think that would be a real statement. Hell of a lot of fights to be made at that weight. And yeah, maybe a guy like Jason Sosa. That I think that's a fight where Valdez could look really good, and he would really be able to kind of tee off on him and potentially stop him. Maybe I suppose I was going to say Lomachenko, but I don't think Valdez is going to move up anytime soon. I don't think there's any need to rush that fight. But yeah, okay. If we were agreed on, we've got a couple for prospect of the year. What about your prospect for 2017? So your one to watch if you have to pick someone.
Josh Taylor.
Oh, you're going to go for Taylor? Okay, yep.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he's the goods, man. He looks phenomenal, to be honest. I mean, the way he's just blowing through these guys, especially the last fight against Dave Ryan. I mean, it didn't matter. Like, he just chipped away at him and finished him. It was the 5th round, I believe.
Yeah, it was. I had a bet on Ryan to go the distance in that fight.
Yeah, he's only about seven fights into his pro career. He's pretty young, and he's fighting on the Frampton Santa Cruz card later this month. So I and especially with Shane McGuigan as a trainer, and I think Cyclone so far, they've been very good as a promotion at moving their guys. So I think he's set for big things, especially in 140, which is one of the weakest divisions in boxing right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say his division will help him in the short term and probably hinder him in the long term. I think he'll need to move up eventually, because I can see Crawford moving up maybe in a year or two as well. And let's be real, Josh Taylor's not going to be fighting Terence Crawford in the next 18 months. But yeah, I agree with you. I think you can get to the sort of top 20 at light welter reasonably easily at the moment compared to what it looked like a few years ago. Would you like to see? I mean, it kind of seems a bit stupid. But would you like to see a guy like do you know who I've just box wrecked this? I've done a pure box wreck. Do you remember Emmanuel Taylor fought Broner a couple of years ago? I can't remember. He's American, is he? Emmanuel Taylor. I'd like to see. Yeah. Would you like to see Josh Taylor in against a guy like that, or maybe a guy like I don't know, Tommy Coyle, or
I think he smashed Coyle.
Well, he would, but it'd be a bit of a statement, wouldn't it? And Coyle would take it. I think he is a guy who'd fight anyone. Or a guy like Theophane, maybe, or
yeah, that's like a good test kind of fight.
Or you could put him in with the very dangerous Maurice Hooker coming off a sensational win, a sensational performance against Perez.
Sensational draw.
I watched that again when on Sunday, just because I quite like I just sort of had it on in the background when I was doing something else, and I like to hear the excitement die and sort of drain out of the voices of the commentary. And you've got the first couple of rounds, and you've got like Kellerman and Roy Jones. They're looking for any positive they can draw from Hooker. Oh, look at that lovely jab! Look at his footwork. And then after a couple of rounds, they're like, yeah, he's just jabbing and running away. And every time he tries to exchange, he gets caught clean. And then after about 5 rounds, they're like, yeah, this guy's terrible. Who signed to put this on our network? What is this guy doing as the co-main on a pay-per-view? And then by the end of it, they're saying, I think Jim Lampley even says, I think it's going to be a long time before we see Hooker on HBO again. It's very, very funny. Like you've got this full spectrum of massive hype to complete despair in about 25 minutes. But yeah, maybe they'll cash Hooker out, stick him in with Josh Taylor, or a guy like, right, I'm going to go up to the top 30 now in the division. I mean, yeah, the O'Hara Davis fight is obviously the one that's been talked about. I mean, Davis is actually pretty highly ranked now with a couple of the sanctioning bodies. So I mean, you can kind of see why they don't want the Josh Taylor fight right now, because it's a bit of a risk for no reward. Thomas Delorme, Ryan, sneaking around the top 15, hasn't fought in a while. Taylor probably knock him out, I'd say.
He's fighting on the Francis Santa Cruz card as well. Yeah.
He's fighting. Okay.
Actually, since we're on 140, I think a pretty similar guy to Taylor is Sergey Lipinets, who is he's 11-0, and he's already the mandatory for the IBF, and he's fought good competition.
Well, he knocked out Zapavinia, didn't he, the other couple of months ago? Very good performance, I thought. Really broke. Zapavinia a good fighter, and he really broke him down and won that quite well. Yeah, he looks good. I was surprised. I've seen a couple of people saying that he's a bit overhyped, but I think Lipinets he's been brought along pretty well. And
well, I mean, how can you be overhyped at 140? Because 140 is a terrible division. He's already one of the best fighters in the division with 11 fights.
I'll tell you what, Broner's a lucky man, honestly. If he can make 140 and keep his weight at that limit, I could see him when Crawford goes up. Broner could potentially hold a title for quite a while, just because the competition is so awful. I mean, looking at BoxRec, you've still got guys like Provodnikov and John Molina in the top 10, and these are guys who haven't had no good. On the subject of 140, we've had I don't know if you saw, we've had Burns versus Indongo announced today for the what's the date? I think it's April. Let me just double check. Yeah, mid-April in Glasgow. So what do you think? Do you think Indongo will get how many rounds do you think he'll get on the cards when that goes the distance?
Maybe 5. I mean, because the thing about Indongo is that knockout over Troyanovsky really doesn't show who he is. I mean, if you look at his other fights and you look at his resume, he's not a puncher, and I mean, he lost like 4 rounds to washed up Kaiser Mabuza.
Yeah,
and so like he's not like that great of a fighter. I mean, even though he's world champion, and he knocked out an undefeated, Russian knockout artist Troyanovsky. It was kind of like I don't want to say it was a fluke, but it was kind of a fluke.
No, yeah, I know what you mean, because I mean, you actually, you sort of saw it coming. People were hyping Troyanovsky a bit and saying he was a good fighter, and he is a good fighter. But you said, he does have a bit of a, he has some chin issues, and you mentioned it before the fight, and obviously it played out. It played out that way, and the only name I recognised on Ndongo's record was Mabuza, and obviously, like you say, it was a very, very washed up Mabuza, and he beat him quite narrowly. I think this has got distance written all over it. I think it will be a close fight, and Ricky Burns will get a 9-3, 10-2 decision, very wide win, and we will be talking about Ricky Burns as a 6-time world champion. It's at 3 different weights. It's absolutely crazy. And then there'll only be 2 belt holders. It will be Burns and it will be Crawford, and Broner should beat Granados. Broner will have the money behind him. I think it's pretty obvious he'll fight Burns, and then I don't know. Maybe you'll get Broner Crawford on pay-per-view next year. You never know. Can you imagine how much of a talk about a shutout win? If Crawford did that to Postel, what would he do to Broner? Honestly, that would be it would be absolutely embarrassing as a main event goes. Right. Well, anyway, we'll leave that. So that's your prospect of the year. What about just as the last one for 2016? Trainer of the year for last year.
I think it's hard to narrow just one down. I mean, I know it's kind of cliche to go with Abel Sanchez, just because he's Golovkin and people always pick him. But if you look what he did with Murat Gassiev, who became a world champion, beating, one of the best cruisers out there, Denis Lebedev. And, Gassiev was a guy with only like 25 amateur fights. He turned pro when he was like 17, and he was really, really raw. And now he's really come a long way under Abel Sanchez. And then if you look at some of the Denis Shafikov and Konstantin Ponomarev, undefeated Russian prospect, who's looked a lot better lately. And so I think he has his overall stable, and how some of his guys have improved. I think I'd go with Abel Sanchez.
Do you think if Kovalev had got the decision, do you think we'd be saying John David Jackson? Trading the number 1 pound for pound guy in the sport. I think Kovalev would probably be number 1, wouldn't he, if he'd beaten Ward?
Yeah, probably. I mean, John David Jackson had, I guess he had Curtis Stevens, who didn't look good at all against De La Rosa, and then I guess it doesn't really mean anything that he trained Hopkins for his last fight, because Hopkins was going to do whatever he wanted. So
there are some crazy stories now about that. We obviously won't talk about that fight. It was a while ago, but stories about Hopkins getting really beaten up in the gym by sort of 18, teenagers basically, and doing very little sort of full-on sparring. And I think Nazim Richardson was sort of quite concerned by what he was hearing. If you listen to interviews with him talking about the Joe Smith fight, he seems to think that Hopkins was lying to himself, I think was the word he used. But anyway, enough about Hopkins. We'll do right. We've got a couple more fun ones to finish our 2016 on. The biggest duck of the year. So it has to have specifically happened in 2016. I can think of one to get us rolling, which was Josh Warrington turning down the Lee Selby fight.
That's a good shout.
Because he was getting married in, when was that? In August, I think, or July. That's a pretty good one. That's the one that immediately sprang to my mind, but there have been quite a few.
Now, would you count it if I said, even though I think Canelo's going to fight Golovkin this September, but would you say last year?
Oh yeah, I mean, defending the middleweight title and then saying, I don't fuck around, and then a week later, putting the belt in the trash, doing a Riddick Bowe. I agree. I think that was pretty bad. I mean, those are the obvious ones. I'm trying to think. To be honest, I think Estrada's been ducking Gonzalez for years, and I would be tempted to put Estrada in there as a kind of on an ongoing basis. And obviously Stevenson, I mean, it's got to the point now where Stevenson's ducking guys like Alvarez, who aren't even champions, and he's sort of refusing to fight them. Could we also say, I guess it's hard because he has eventually signed to fight him, but Danny Garcia seemed to delay the Thurman fight by quite a long time, you know? For a long time, Thurman was saying, can we just fight, please? And Garcia was saying, no, I want a tune-up, etc., etc. Yeah, I think that one was pretty bad. And I guess can we throw Saunders in there as well, just for turning down Saunders for turning down Golovkin in the new year, and then obviously turning down $3 million or whatever it was, but then also turning down Gabe Rosado in September.
Yeah, that one was bad.
I mean, why would you duck Gabe Rosado? It just doesn't make any sense. He must have got offered absolutely terrible money, or maybe there was something else to it, you know.
Well, I think he was just, extremely out of shape.
Yeah. The rumor going around was that he wanted a condition that he would get Canelo next, and they had like a verbal agreement, but he wanted it in writing, and they wouldn't give it to him as a written contract, and so he just kind of pulled the plug. But yeah, I'm inclined to go with your explanation that he just wasn't. He wouldn't have had time to prepare, because we've all seen the photos of him over the summer. You know, probably 200 pounds. He looked like he dropped about 30 pounds to get down to middleweight, which is absolutely crazy when you think about it. Okay, so we'll go biggest duck. I'd still say it's Warrington. I just think because he came out with that excuse and he directly said, look, I'm getting married, I can't fight him. And then, obviously the whole thing fell through and he fought someone else. I thought it was just so funny the way it came out. So yeah, we'll go with Warrington for that one. What about the hype job of the year? And this doesn't necessarily have to be someone who was hyped and then got beaten. It could just be someone that you think is getting sort of undue praise.
Well, for
2016, this was, yeah.
For the first half of the year, Felix Verdejo, I think he hasn't shown anything really ever since he's gotten this push on HBO that he's the next big Puerto Rican star, and then he goes and gets in a motorcycle accident and delays his career even more. So
if you look at the guys he's been fighting and how other prospects have dealt with them, Verdejo is underperforming quite massively. I agree with you. It'll be interesting to see has he got a fight scheduled for his comeback?
Yeah,
I think
he's fighting February 3rd, I think.
It's against another sort of similar level opposition, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, he's got two scheduled actually. He's got apparently he's got a fight in February and he's got a fight in June as well against TBA. So that shows I guess maybe they're looking past. I don't know if they're going to try and force the WBO route, because I know
that's what people are thinking. People are saying, they could be trying to get Flanagan to New York in June, which is a massive step up.
I think Flanagan takes that, and I think he beats him. Whether he gets the decision, on I don't know when Puerto Rican Day is, but it'll be in the sort of New York with millions of Puerto Ricans living there. Whether Madison Square Garden gives Flanagan a fair shake is another matter, but I think that's a very good fight for Flanagan, and it will be a real name on his record. And obviously, if he travels, going to get paid very well. I think that if I'm Frank Warren, I send him over and just hope that he's able to take it out of the judge's hands, I guess, or at least get a rematch clause at the very least. I'd agree with that. I just want to sort of toot my own horn for a second in terms of overrated, because I've been saying for about 3 years that Nicholas Walters was one of the most overrated fighters in the sport, full stop, after he knocked out a 40-year-old Vic Darchinyan and then like a 36-year-old Nonito Donaire. He was getting this huge hype as a massive puncher, and I just didn't see it. I thought he was a good fighter who'd been massively overrated, and I picked Lomachenko to stop him, and I thought that Lomachenko would absolutely dominate him, and was quite pleased to be just to see that happen. And I hope that Walters, people will see now that it's a question of a guy fighting much smaller opponents and looking strong. And it amazes me how often fans are fooled by, big size differences. And you still see guys saying Canelo's one of the biggest punchers in the sport when, and then they point to knockouts of Khan or knockouts of, what's his name, Josecito Lopez or light welterweights. And they say, well, this proves that he's a huge puncher. And it annoys me how willing fans are to buy into it. But anyway, I won't rant about that too much. Last one. Who do you think overachieved the most in 2016?
As far as overachieving,
my first thought was a very old Ricky Burns.
Yeah,
winning another world title and getting a unification fight.
I don't think that can be topped.
No, I mean, look, one of the questions this week was about why I shit on Ricky Burns so much, and it's not really that I have a problem with him. He's a tough guy who's fought hard for 15 years or so, and he's fought a lot of very good opponents. I think it's mainly because he's kind of a hardcore's favourite. It's just the hypocrisy of his fans that bugs me. And so, to anyone wondering why I'm sort of constantly talking about robberies in Glasgow and Burns being a fraud and all the rest of it, it's mainly because of his fans who will call out bad scorecards every week, and then they'll stay silent when Ricky Burns gets a 118-110 in a fight where he got his arse absolutely handed to him for 10 rounds. And then they turn in a horrendous card and no one says a word. So that's my short answer. I'll go Ricky Burns just because he's somehow managed to get back to the top of the sport. And if he beats Indongo, which I think is very, very feasible, you could see Burns Crawford 2 for all 4 belts and the ring title. Absolutely crazy. And then sod's law. Crawford gets injured, injures his hand, has to retire, and suddenly Ricky Burns is a Hall of Famer. Oh dear, stranger things have happened, I suppose. Now, Ryan, just to move on quickly to the sort of, I guess, breaking news from the last few days. Just jump in if you've got anything to say about any of the following. Last night announced that Pacquiao is going to be fighting Australia's Jeff Horn, who I believe is reasonably highly ranked with one of the sanctioning bodies. I think it might be the IBF. WBO. Sorry, WBO. You've got a theory about this fight taking place in Australia, I think, in terms of getting the Filipinos over. Is that right?
Well, I don't think it's just the Filipinos. I just think, since Australia really never gets, events with boxers of that magnitude, and against an Aussie, I think it'd be pretty big, because let's be real, Pacquiao's stardom has dwindled in the US. He's not, and once you take away Crawford, there really is no one to fight that's going to sell in the US. So Pacquiao's on his retirement tour. From the promoter standpoint, it really only makes sense to go do a big event, stadium, 55,000. I don't know if they'll sell it out, but I think they should. And then it's also going to be pay-per-view down there.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is just the kind of stuff that's going to happen. And, Pacquiao is probably his last year of boxing. I mean, Horn, I think he's a good fighter, but, he's obviously not on Pacquiao's level. This is more of just like a novelty fight, just to take Pacquiao to different markets on like his retirement tour, and because he's a massive international superstar, and so I really just think that's how it's going to work, just because you can't put really anything on in the US that's going to really make a lot of money for Top Rank. Like Crawford, that's not going to happen right now, and Pacquiao wants too much money for that. And then Thurman and Garcia are fighting in March. Spence is mandatory for Brooke. And then obviously those guys are on the other side of the street. And then, I mean, once you take out like all those names, like who really is there to fight that's going to generate interest and, make money in the US? You can, I don't even, yeah, Aaron's been throwing around that they won't do this fight on pay-per-view in the US and that they'll try to get it on, regular HBO or free TV, which, I'm skeptical about, but that's what he should do, because if this was on pay-per-view in the US, like it'd completely bomb.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I mean, absolutely. I mean, we'd be talking less than 200,000 buys, wouldn't we? For sure. Nowhere near enough to cover Pacquiao. I don't know if he's still got, what was his minimum back in the day? Was it 15 million or something like that? No, I don't know if he's still getting that, but I mean,
I'm not sure. They've had to adjust his minimum, to go with his dwindling sales. I mean, the
yeah,
Vargas fight, Bob Arum said it did around 300,000, and then people say, well, that means it probably did like 220 or something like that. So in the vicinity of like 200 to 300, which is like really low for a Pacquiao fight.
yes, yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is a guy who couldn't do below sort of 650, 700,000 for about 5 or 6 years against pretty much anyone. Um, do you think there would be an argument that it makes sense for Pacquiao to come to the UK at this point in his career? Because I mean, I can say for sure, um, let's say Pacquiao fought Kell Brook at 147, or let's say he fought, I mean, even a 140 guy, like even if he fought someone like Ricky Burns, just sort of taking a name out of there, that would do a stadium in the UK, definitely. Just having Pacquiao over here. I mean, Floyd's doing his stupid after dinner speaking tour to the UK, and that sells 5,000 tickets in every venue it goes to, and that's just Floyd, answering a few questions. I think Pacquiao would do huge numbers in the UK even now, and that would obviously be a box office fight on Sky. I mean, I guess it's the question is whether he'd want to go up to 147 and fight Kell Brook. Or I mean, even Amir Khan, it kind of makes a weird sort of sense at this stage in his career. Whether it's for a belt or not, it doesn't really matter. I mean, Khan Pacquiao will be a stadium fight still over here, and we do. We've got a much bigger population than Australia, and we do spend a lot more money on boxing, and we draw bigger crowds. So, I mean, maybe he fights Horn. He has a fight back in the Philippines again as a sort of on a goodbye tour, and then he ends up, maybe Crawford is his 80th fight or whatever, or his 70th fight. I forget how many he's had. I think he's had about 65 or so, and then maybe he fights a guy like Broner. I do still think that could do big numbers if it was promoted in the right way. But yeah, it's Arum being a bit intransigent with the other promotional companies. But I'd like to see Pacquiao over here. I wouldn't be under any illusions that Pacquiao's way past his best. But if he showed up and fought a guy like Ricky Burns or a guy like Kell Brook or Amir Khan in London, I'd love to go and watch him. It's very much the reason people go and watch Barcelona play football. It's to say that you've seen it, in your lifetime. You've seen those players in the flesh, and I think Pacquiao would get a huge crowd. So Arab never mentions the UK, but it would be nice if they considered it. Right, so that's Pacquiao versus Horn. Burns versus Indongo we've kind of done. I mean, again, it's not breaking news, but do you have any thoughts on Golovkin Jacobs or Cotto Kirkland or any of the other sort of upcoming pay-per-views?
Well, I mean, neither of them really should be on pay-per-view, especially Cotto Kirkland. I mean, that's just a fight, like, no one really cares about that fight. I mean, Kirkland pops up once every 2 years to, like, collect, $1 million and then disappear for another 2 years. And, yeah, I mean, Cotto is on his retirement tour also, and he has a huge minimum from Rock Nation. I think it's like $10 million or something. So, I mean, I don't blame him for sticking around, and because Rock Nation was dumb enough to agree to pay him that much. But that's pretty much why this is the way it is on pay-per-view, because Cotto's minimum. And
yeah, in a weird way, it's not Cotto's fault, is it? Because
right, I
he
mean,
has to get. Doesn't he get? He gets 15 mil or 10 mil or something, doesn't he? Every fight, something
yeah,
ridiculous.
like if you got a minimum of 10 million, then why would you not fight?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's astonishing that they signed that contract. I remember when it was announced, I thought it was like a misprint. You know, I thought that that they said Cotto was guaranteed 30 million over 3 fights or whatever, or however much it was, and I thought that was, you know, a misprint, or sort of talking about a gross figure for the promotional company and not just the purse of the fighter. It's absolutely ridiculous, and he's just such a piece of shit, Cotto, that he will fight bums and charge, you know, $75 for a ticket and $50 for the pay-per-view and all the rest of it. Do you think Kirkland with Ann Wolf has got any sort of chance, or do you think he's completely sort of washed up at this point?
I think he has a chance. You know, he just has to try to, you know, bull rush him in like the first 3 or 4 rounds and just go all out and see what happens, because that's the only chance he has, really. If he can just put it on
Cotto's
try to
record
catch
at
him.
154 is awful as well. He's got no
Yeah,
significant wins there. And, you know, he stepped up once against Trout and he got dominated. By all accounts, Ann Wolf is in the corner. So yeah, so you think you expect to see a sort of a fired up Kirkland give it a go for maybe the first 3 or 4 rounds and then sort of see what happens?
yeah, I think that's going to be the strategy. You know, just put everything in like the first 3 or 4 rounds and hope you can, you know, catch him on the chin or just overwhelm him and get him out of there. I mean, otherwise, you know, Cotto can probably land a counter shot or something, kind of like Canelo did, and
Yeah.
get Kirkland out, because Kirkland's chin isn't very good. That's the thing.
The worrying thing for me was that in the first fight against Canelo, Kirkland sort of rushed out, didn't he? And he stood right in front of him, and he was all over him. And then Canelo landed a body shot after about 90 seconds, and Kirkland just, you could see all the fight went out of him. And to me, it looked like, you know, you want to assume that was because he didn't have the Ann Wolf training. So hopefully, with a bit of Ann Wolf training, you know, under his belt, and one of those crazy intense camps where he's pushing farm equipment across a field for 6 hours or whatever, hopefully with a bit more intensity he'll be able to stand up to the body shots a bit more. But I thought it was the body shots that took it out of him against Canelo, and it'll be very interesting to see if Cotto sort of targets that early on to try and take the steam off his punches. Do we think, obviously Canelo is a big puncher when he's down at 154? Do we think Cotto will be able to hurt Kirkland? Do you think he's much of a puncher at light middle?
Yeah, I think Cotto can hurt Kirkland. I mean, Nobuhiro Ishida did, and this one guy did in one of Kirkland's comeback fights. So I just don't think Kirkland has much of a chin, and especially not when, you know, he's rushing face forward, face first in the punches, which makes them even harder.
Yeah.
So I think Cotto can definitely catch him. I mean, you see the way he caught Daniel Geale, even though Geale was like completely emaciated, still he put him away, and you know, that's like a 160 pounder who had to really struggle to get down there. So I think Cotto would be able to hurt him for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it might actually end up being a really, really fun fight for 3 or 4 rounds.
Yeah, I think it will be.
Yeah, so I guess in that case you're getting your money's worth, aren't you? Well, it won't be a boring boxing match. It's just a pay-per-view. If this was an HBO main event, I'd be really up for it, and I think, you know, great fight. I might even stay up and set my watch and watch this on a Sunday morning. But yeah, as it's a bit of a shot in the gut to have it as a pay-per-view. A couple of others that have been announced in the last couple of days: David Price versus Christian Hamer. I think we were tweeting about that the other day. You had some thoughts on that one.
Yeah, Price. Yeah, that's an interesting one. I think, you know, Price could probably knock him out because Hammer, really struggles with taller opponents. But then again, Price just isn't very good, and you know, Hammer could probably beat him just by virtue of being a decent heavyweight. I mean, he did beat,
He's not terrible, is he, Hammer? I mean, it will be Price's best win by a long way.
yeah. I mean, Hammer beat like a woefully out of shape, off the juice Erkan Tepper, which whatever. But he still beat a guy like Tepper, who I guess is a decent heavyweight even without roids. But that's way better than anyone Price has ever beat. And he was able. Tepper's a big puncher, and he was able to go 12 rounds with him anyway. So I think it's going to be an interesting fight. I mean, it's hard to say who's going to win because Price can just fall apart at like any moment when faced with any type of resistance.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure Hammer can really put on that type of resistance. So I could see really either side winning there. I could see Price knocking him out early, or falling apart after like 4 rounds.
Yeah, I think my pick at this stage would be maybe a late Hammer TKO type of thing where Price really does fall apart. Interestingly enough, Hammer appears to have another fight scheduled for 6 weeks afterwards. He's got a fight scheduled against TBA for the 25th of March, and is fighting Price on the 4th of February. This fight was also announced at quite short notice, wasn't it? I mean, it was only announced a few days ago, sort of less than a month out. Do we think there's a danger that Hammer's sort of coming over for the paycheck?
I think he'll probably fancy it because it's David Price. I mean, it's not like Tyson Fury. This is a guy who's been knocked out like 3 times and is known to not have a good chin. So I think his team probably got the offer and they were like, yeah, David Price isn't up to much, so let's take the fight. And yeah, I mean, I think they're probably confident that they're going to win, and that's why they've gone ahead with it, even with the March 25th date.
Yeah, and like you say, Price is just so beatable, isn't he? Regardless of he obviously he's a huge puncher. He's got genuine one punch power, but yeah, I know what you mean. Any heavyweight sort of in the top 20 or 30 would take that at a heartbeat and think, all I have to do is sort of get it up in his face and he won't know what to do with me, and he'll fall apart. Right, now, just one final one before we get on to our preview of the weekend. Broner versus Granados finally confirmed for the 25th of February. I think it was potentially off for a while, wasn't it? Because Broner went to prison, or he had a suspended court hearing or something like that, or whatever it was. I've seen a few weigh-in pictures. I mean, I really liked this fight when it was first announced, but the longer I think about it, the longer I think Granados is actually sort of tailor-made for Broner.
Well, I think if Broner's not in top shape, then I think Granados is going to be all over him. Especially, the way that Broner kind of likes to stay static and kind of do the
Throw
shoulder roll.
one shot at a time.
Yeah, and kind of do the shoulder roll. Thinking he's Floyd, going up against the ropes, and letting a guy pound on him.
Yeah,
and kind of like Amir Imam did against Granados until eventually, he couldn't do anything back because Granados beat the fight out of him. So, and actually Granados really, I think he's only fought once since the Imam fight. So
yeah,
maybe he's improved. Maybe he's improved a lot. We don't really know. And
his record does suggest he's not much of a puncher, though. And Broner,
right.
for all his faults, does have a pretty good chin.
Yeah, he does, but eventually, it's always going to catch up to you. Eventually, Broner has natural talent, but we'll see how much effect like all these years of, just not being disciplined has on, if it takes a toll or not, or if he's still, able to get by at a decent level, just, coasting off his natural ability. But I mean, he also has to make weight too, which I mean, he's looked pretty heavy in the recent stuff I've seen. So I'm not sure if he'll even make the weight.
I guess it's a non-title fight, isn't it? It's another one where
Oh yeah,
even if he fluffs the weight again, the sanctuary bodies would still sort of welcome him in, and I'm sure he'd be able to get. I mean, I know Ricky Burns had said that over the summer they had discussions with Broner, but then obviously he had his troubles with the law and everything else, which meant that it had to be sort of put off for now. But I'm sure if Ricky Burns ends up with 2 belts, Broner will be first on the phone to try and get him over to the US. Excuse me, everyone, if I'm sounding a bit bunged up. I have got a bit of a cold, but I'm soldiering through like a true warrior. Right, now, Ryan, before we finish up, a couple more things sort of related to the Price Hammer fight, which is obviously going to be on the undercard of Eubank against Reynold Quinlan for the esteemed IBO middleweight title. As far as I'm aware, this pay-per-view is still happening. I literally wake up every day expecting to read that it's fallen apart and it's not going to happen anymore. I fully expect it to fall apart before the date. I would be quite surprised if the thing happens, as it's supposed to. Forget the fight, because we both know that it's terrible and Eubank should win easily. What do you think of Eubank more generally, and how far do you think he can go? I suppose let's answer it in 2 parts. How far do you think he can go with his dad acting the way he is at the moment, and then how far do you think he can go sort of on his actual talent with proper management and proper sort of promotion?
Well, he's gotten to where he is now basically solely on natural talent, because I mean, he basically said he trains himself. Like, he doesn't need a trainer and all that. I mean, he's a very, very naturally talented boxer, and he lacks a lot of fundamentals, but he's able to get away with it just because he has natural ability, and nobody questions his work ethic. I mean, he's a really hard grafter, and
He's always in fantastic shape.
yeah, I mean, the amount of punches he's able to throw in a fight is crazy. Like against Chudinov, Chudinov kept coming forward on him, and Eubank was throwing so many punches, and he kept it up for 12 whole rounds.
Yeah.
Which was pretty impressive. So, I mean, I think if he was with like a real trainer and a real management team, I mean, I think he could be very, very good. But that probably should have started a lot earlier, and it looks like it's never going to start anyway. He's just going to do it his own way, and even doing it his own way, he's still probably good enough to win like a world title, whether it's at middleweight or super middle, because I don't think many people would pick Saunders over him in a rematch. I mean, you'd think Eubank would learn from the first fight, and he wouldn't just have a staring contest for the first 6 rounds, especially when he's able to work with such a high volume of punches over the 12-round distance. So
yeah,
I think he's capable.
I'd make him a favourite against Saunders in a rematch. I agree with that. And I think, to sort of emphasize what you were saying, he's incredibly mentally focused and mentally strong, but that results in him being in good shape all the time and being very fit, but it also results in him being completely unwilling to listen to anyone else. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, isn't it, really? He's incredibly single-minded, which is both a good and a bad thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's taken him this far, and it's probably gonna take him further, in whichever kind of weird off-the-wall direction he goes. But he's kind of like an enigma, because he does everything like completely different and kind of in the completely wrong way.
Yeah,
but he still kind of gets to where he is just because of who is, his name, who his dad is, and because he has a bunch of natural talent.
but equally, can you imagine how marketable he'd be if he was? Imagine if he had Floyd's kind of professionalism behind the scenes, and then he had his public persona. He could be huge. He could be, we're talking sort of Canelo levels in the UK. Like, whether he'd be a proper love him or hate him type of fighter. He would get thousands of people who, who were convinced he was the best in the world, and then he'd have thousands more that would buy tickets just to see him lose every single time. And he's in, 160, 168. These are, in the UK at least, these are glamour divisions. They've always been glamour divisions over here. Like, we produce a lot of fighters around middleweight and around super middleweight, and we always have done. In the same way that kind of lightweight or featherweight has always been a glamour division in Mexico. Eubank against guys like DeGale or George Groves or even, Martin Murray and people like that. These are all big fights, and he's just, and then obviously you've got Billy Joe and you've got the rivalry there. And then, that's without even including Golovkin and Danny Jacobs and these other guys sort of in and around the top 10. And even a guy like Canelo. I mean, imagine Eubank Jr. against Canelo. That could be an incredibly fun fight, from a sort of fan's perspective. Those guys would just be trading the entire time. Imagine those two throwing combinations. It would be fantastic to watch. But sadly, it will almost definitely never happen because of the way Eubank is outside the ring. And I know what you mean. It's kind of, part of me wants to give up and just start ignoring him. But equally, most of his fights are really, really good to watch. And this Quinlan guy can obviously punch a little bit, and that will probably be a really fun fight to watch. I fully expect Eubank to win by stoppage, but it will probably be fun while it lasts, and it will be an enjoyable way to sort of to spend half an hour on a Saturday night. And they're sort of doing the right thing in a way, because they're putting on a decent enough undercard with some pretty well matched fights. I've always said, and I don't know if you feel the same, I don't care about the names on the undercard. I just want, if you can give me as close to a 50-50 fight as possible, then that's enough. I don't care whether it's British level, European level, world level, whatever. If the fights are very evenly matched, I will sort of sit on the edge of my seat and watch it. And yeah, I'd rather have what's the other one that's been confirmed? John Ryder against Adam Etches. Yeah, that's a British level fight at best, arguably maybe an English level fight, but that's a pretty well matched, 60-40, 50-50 type of a fight. And I'd rather have that than John Ryder up against, a world champion where we know that Ryder's going to get absolutely schooled for 12 rounds, or Adam Etches getting knocked out by a far better sort of world level opponent. I'm not interested in that. I'd much rather have an evenly matched fight. And I think, in a weird way, the Eubanks have kind of done the right thing, but they've done it for all the wrong reasons. They've done it because they're ripping us off, and they know it, and they know that no one's going to buy the main event. Where would you like to see Eubank go next, assuming he wins? Would you want the Saunders rematch? Sort of, let's say if you're offered Saunders Golovkin or Saunders Eubank 2, which one would you go for?
Saunders Golovkin or Saunders Eubank 2?
Yeah, so let's say those two are both on the table for I don't know, maybe September, say.
I'd definitely go for Saunders Golovkin, just because, Golovkin actually, his main objective has been to unify the division. So that's a chance for him to, finally do that and get that WBO belt. Because he has the 3 belts.
Yeah.
That's the only belt he's missing.
And I think eventually they'll have to take the ring title from Canelo, won't they, if he's not going to fight at middleweight. And I guess in a strange way, a fight like Jacobs Golovkin could be for the ring title as well, because those are, if Canelo's not a middleweight, those are clearly the 1 and 2 in the division. However good you think Jacobs is, and I personally don't think he's that good, and I think he'll get beaten badly. But for better or worse, he's probably the number 2 guy in the division. Let's say Saunders is busy. Who would you want to stick Eubank in with in the summer then, assuming he wins this nonsense belt next month?
Well, middleweight or super middleweight, because I know this is a super middleweight fight against Quinlan, but he's like, he'll go back down, but he looks like he struggles to make middleweight to me. Actually, I think super middleweight's a better division for Eubank Jr. just because, there's belts all over the place. There's a bunch of different title holders, and there's some pretty weak champions that he could take advantage of, with his name power. So
yeah, I mean, you'd have to make him I'd love to see him fight George Groves. I think he could beat George Groves, and I think that would be a sort of career best win for him. And then obviously you've got guys like Zuga, haven't you, or Zoiga, who really aren't much good. And again, and potentially a unified British champion, in DeGale if he wins next weekend or this weekend, and then Callum Smith as well. And these are all huge, potentially pay-per-view fights in the UK. It's it'd be a shame if none of them happened, but that seems like a good point to sort of move on to the weekend. Obviously, the main fight is this Saturday in the Barclays Centre, isn't it? DeGale against Jack. First of all, who are you picking? And sort of how do you think the fight will play out?
Well, I'm picking DeGale. I think it's going to be a close points decision. I think he's going to bank some early rounds, and then he's going to fall into that habit of coasting during the middle, where Jack will kind of catch up to him, and then I think DeGale will come back during the championship rounds and solidify the victory. I just think he's got too many tools and too many different approaches he can take, whereas Jack is more of like a steady orthodox fighter who throws mostly straight textbook kind of punches. And I think DeGale just has a lot more options in the fight. And
I think almost everyone so far that I've spoken to has predicted the fight will go the distance. Do you think there's any scope for a knockout? Do you think either guy will be able to hurt the other one?
I mean, possibly, because the thing about DeGale is he throws some really weird angle shots, like especially loopy shots, and those are the type of shots that you might be able to catch a guy, with when he's not expecting it. Like, I mean, Jack's been knocked out before by Derek Edwards. Just a shot he didn't see.
Yeah,
maybe it's possible DeGale, with one of those looping shots could catch him like he did with Andre Durrell in the second round. And then I don't think Jack will be stopping DeGale. DeGale's shown a good chin throughout his career.
Yeah, he has, and people sort of always disparage DeGale's gas tank, but it's not as if I've never really seen him in trouble because he was tired. I've seen him kind of go to the ropes and shell up a few times, but I've never seen him. I've never seen him kind of sort of hanging on for dear life because he was exhausted at the end of a fight. And I agree with you. I think people kind of overplay that a little bit. It's a tough one, but part of me really wants to say that DeGale's going to knock him out, just because I think that, do you remember the left hand that he hit Durrell with, that put Durrell down very heavily? I think Jack is wide open for that punch, and I think Jack will be Mr. Dependable coming forward with the 1-2s and fighting every round. And this is both a strength and a weakness. He'll be fighting every round at a very similar pace, and he won't let up at all. And I think fighting at the same pace every single round, DeGale is a guy who I think he's extremely good counterpuncher for the first thing, but he's also he's very good at timing punches in between his opponent's combinations. And Jack isn't a sort of jab and clinch guy. He's a guy who throws combos, and I feel like DeGale's going to have a lot of chances to come back with the big sort of looping counter punches. And I just don't think Jack's ever fought anyone who throws shots like that. Do you know what I mean? Who throws those weird... If you look at the punch that put Durrell down, it was like there's no one else in the division who throws that punch at all. It was this crazy kind of almost overhand. It was almost an overhand left, but also a kind of wide hooking left. It was this really strange punch, a bit like the one Maidana used to throw, where it looks like he's almost swimming. It's, when you're doing sort of front crawl in the water. And punches like that, I think that's what, in my book, that's what marks DeGale out as being a bit special in the division. I think he throws these really unorthodox shots, but he's so fast, he can get away with them. And I'm going to have to check the odds. I'm very, very confident DeGale's going to win. I think if he loses, it will be entirely down to his own sort of poor stamina management, I suppose. I think it will be down to him taking rounds off if he loses. I don't think it will be down to anything Jack does or any way kind of Jack imposes himself on the fight. Jack's a guy who I think is probably 7 or 8 out of 10 in every department, but I think DeGale is genuinely sort of unique and special in some ways. And I've been banging the DeGale drum for a long time now and saying that I think he's a potentially sort of pound for pound fighter when he's on his game. But it's a really tough one. I think if the odds are good enough, I'm going to bet on a DeGale stoppage because I think he can get to him, and I think he'll throw these he'll throw the crazy punches that I don't think Jack will have ever seen anything like that before. Having said that, I fully expect to look stupid next week because DeGale is the sort of guy who will absolutely dominate for 3 rounds. He'll have the stoppage there in his sights, and then he'll just decide that he wants to take the next 5 rounds off, and he'll coast and he'll sit on the ropes and he'll hang his back on the ropes and sort of relax. And yeah, it's a strange one. I hope he's done the weight right. I think that's what will make all the difference in this fight. If he's in the shape he was in against DeGale, I think he'll win very, very clearly and stop Jack, because I don't think Jack is as good as DeGale. And I mean, who would you, if DeGale fought Jack now, who would you make favorite for that fight?
That's tough because DeGale is such a weird fighter. Like, he switches on and off constantly. I think DeGale at his best would be Jack. But I mean, further on to your point about, if DeGale does the weight right, he's with a strength and conditioning coach for like the first time. And if you look at his physique, like, it looks better than ever. And so I know, physiques obviously don't win fights, but it's just, a little interesting note, ahead of.
But mate, you're absolutely right, because I've said this for ages about DeGale as well. I've said DeGale isn't naturally that shredded. Do you know what I mean? He doesn't have the body fat of a guy like Andre Dirrell. If you look at the weigh-ins for DeGale against Dirrell, Dirrell is completely sort of shredded down to the bone, and DeGale looks quite kind of flat by comparison. But if you then look at DeGale when he weighed in against Bute, you can just tell that he's not been training to the same level. And obviously he made the weight, and he was still in very good shape and still very fit, but he hadn't kind of pushed his body that extra 5% or whatever. And I think that's a very, very good sign. In a weird way, I think it's actually sort of reasonably easy to predict DeGale fights based on how he looks in the sort of 48 hours before. I remember against Medina as well, I thought he looked very, very weight drained. His face looked very drawn for the couple of days before the fight, and he had big dark circles around his eyes. I haven't seen any of that yet, and I know that you've said that obviously the photos going around, he's in very good shape. I will be very interested to see how DeGale looks at the weigh-in, and if he looks, if he looks healthy, if his face looks fresh and he's not really drawn in, then I'm going to go with a DeGale stoppage, because I think he's on a skills level. I think he's a level above Jack, I believe. But then again, I am a bit of a fanboy for DeGale, and always have been. And I really, really hope he wins, and I hope he wins in style and can come on to sort of go on to big unification fights. And I know he's expressed an interest in fighting Ramirez in the future with for the WBO belt as well. DeGale's he's kind of half with Heyman, half with Eddie Hearn, half kind of independent and sort of mouthing off about both of them. I'm not really sure where he stands. I think he's maybe in quite a good position to work with anyone. And as a result, could potentially get the another unification with Ramirez. And I would be, how would you see that one going? I would be very, very confident that DeGale would beat Ramirez, who I think is a very sort of quite a pedestrian fighter at the top level. Obviously a very good fighter as well. Oh, you there, Ryan? Sorry.
Oh yeah, sorry.
I was just saying, yeah. Where do you see the winner going, basically, from this one?
I think DeGale's gonna stay at the weight. I think if Jack wins, he's gonna move up, because there's been rumblings that Jack is struggling with the weight, and he's been talking about moving up. I think this is his last fight at super middleweight either way. And you know, DeGale actually recently said, you know, he could make middleweight. So I don't know, because
Yeah, he
he
says
said
that.
he used to blow up in weight, but now he doesn't anymore.
I'd be amazed if he made middleweight. Honestly, apparently the story is that for years, and again this is a sort of DeGale propaganda story, but I actually do believe it, that he for years was training with he had a hip injury which limited the amount that he could of like cardio that he could do, and that would explain why he would blow up in weight between fights, because he'd obviously stopped running. And he said he finally got that fixed around 2014, and that also coincided with him suddenly kind of stepping up and you know, knocking out a few guys and going to world level, obviously, and beating Durrell and all the rest of it. So yeah, it's a strange one. If you believe DeGale, then it bodes very, very well for the future, where he can now sort of train all year round and not blow up in weight. But the middleweight thing, honestly, I don't buy that for a second. I can't imagine him at middleweight. He's about 6'3" or something. I don't see it at all.
Yeah, the thing about DeGale, I really don't think he's that big of a guy. Like, he doesn't have much muscle mass. Like, and that's kind of what I said about the strength and conditioning coach. Like based on how his physique's been before, it looks like he's really never like done any type of strength training or weightlifting, you know, that isn't like lightweight.
Yeah.
It looks like he's never really developed any type of, you know, muscle mass. And so he's always kind of had that, you know, bit of a skinny fat look to him.
Absolutely. And that's not to say that he's in bad shape at all, because obviously he's not. He's in excellent shape. But compared to some guys in that division who look like bodybuilders, you know, who are just absolutely ripped down to the bone. Yeah, I agree with you. DeGale's had a bit of puppy fat, and also he's a guy who, like you say, he just doesn't have that much definition naturally. And from I think I've seen the same photos as you in terms of his preparation for the Jack fight. I think this bodes very, very well. I think he's taking it seriously. There was an interview with him in The Guardian this week where he basically said the reason he performed so well against Durrell was because he knew there was a very good chance he could lose, and he was genuinely scared of the idea of getting beaten, and he went into the ring with the fear of losing. Whereas he said against Medina and against Butte, he said he kind of went into both fights saying, look, he basically said, look, I know that I'm levels above these guys. And to be fair, he is. So you can kind of understand where he's coming from, but equally you want them to be a bit more professional. And he said, I kind of went in there very, very confident, whereas against Durrell, I was scared that I might lose. And he says he's scared that he could lose to Jack, and he knows how good Jack is, and is very aware that if he performs badly, he will get beaten. And I think that's a very good sign. And yeah, maybe I'm being biased because I'm a big fan of the guy, but I think the signs point towards a real sort of statement performance from DeGale. And I will, depending on the odds, I think I'm gonna put some money on the KO. One last one before we finish up, Ryan. I appreciate we've been going on for a while now. On the undercard, we've got Jose Pedraza defending his lightweight. He's lightweight, isn't he? Super lightweight? No. Well, he's 135, isn't he, Pedraza? 130. Sorry, he's defending his title, 130 title, against Gervonta Davis, who I think I've seen once before, but again in a sort of against a very low level of competition. How do you see this one going? Because this is divided opinion. I've seen a lot of people picking Davis to step up here.
Well, I mean, Davis hasn't fought anyone remotely near the level of Pedraza, and it's interesting that they're throwing him in a world title fight so quickly. He's only like, he must be like 22 or something like that, because he really hasn't fought anyone, and you know, they're throwing him into the fire against you know, a pretty refined fighter, and you know, Pedraza, who can do the 12 rounds, and you know, is quite accurate and
underrated, I'd say. I think Pedraza's underrated. I think a lot of people are very willing to write him off and sort of dismiss him, but I think he's shown that he's a pretty good fighter.
Yeah, the thing is, like, he hasn't been that active lately, which is kind of why he's, you know, fallen out of people's conscience. Basically, I mean, you know, he's a very kind of a bit of a conservative fighter in that he really manages. He really picks his shots well and conserves his energy and knows when to punch and when to move and stuff like that. And I think he's just going to be too experienced for Davis. I think he's going to win a probably 12 round points decision. I really don't know. I really can't judge anything on like Davis's chin or his durability because he hasn't really fought anyone to test it yet. So I have no idea if Davis can last the 12 rounds against the guy of this level, or if he's just gonna fall apart when he gets hit hard.
Yeah.
So I think,
But then again, Pedraza's not a puncher, though, is he? That's the thing.
right. I mean, he's accurate and he
Yeah.
can pile up some.
Oh, he can
Pile
knock you
up.
down for sure, but it's whether I don't know if he can hurt you. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean maybe Davis knocks him out in a few rounds, but it could, if he doesn't, then what does he have to offer after the initial onslaught? So I just can't really pick Davis here based on what we've seen so far. So I'd have to go with the more experienced fighter, Pedraza.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think I'm picking Pedraza as well, although again, I'm sort of trying to search for value on this card. There might be a bit of value in a double on Pedraza and DeGale, but yeah, a bit of money's come in on Davis. But I mean, I guess they're thinking, look, Pedraza's clearly seen as the weakest champion in that division, and Davis is young enough to come again, isn't he? And he's with Heyman, he's with TN. Is he with TNT? TM.
I think he's with both.
Yeah, but he'll get opportunities, won't he? So hopefully, we get a good fight. And Pedraza's kind of been crying out for an opponent. So if the fight's half decent, do it again. Why not? Keep everyone busy. That's all I really want in 2017. I just want all the fighters to be a bit more active. As a sort of final footnote, do you want to say anything about Lara versus Foreman? I mean, I just can't be bothered with it. It's not even worth making a joke about. It's just such a shit fight.
Yeah, I don't want to say anything about it. I mean,
I'm not gonna watch it. I don't care.
Aside from why in the world would anyone think of even making this fight? That's it.
I guess my only theory is that it's a tick over for
Yeah.
for Lara, because I think they're really struggling to match him, because obviously the Charlos won't fight him, will they? Because they're in the same gym, and then he's already fought Canelo, and I think Lara's in a real. He might need to move up soon because he's really going to struggle to get the big fights.
Yeah, I mean the problem is like he calls out Golovkin, and then it's like you're fighting Delvin Rodriguez, Jan Zavik, and Yuri Foreman. And yeah, I get it. It's not exactly his fault. There's people around him that are organizing the fights and all that, but it's just not a good look. And if you're not going to get any type of half decent fight at 154, you might as well move up, because there's like a plethora of potential matchups, even as unlikely as a Golovkin fight ever be.
Yeah, no, absolutely, I agree. Right, so that leaves us. Do we have any other questions? I mean, just one question to end on. Is there any particular fight that you want to get made in 2017, sort of beyond the obvious? I mean, obviously we all want Canelo to get made, Canelo Golovkin to get made, don't we? And we all want, I guess, Gonzalez versus one of, I'd take Gonzalez versus Inoue, Cuadras, Casimero, or Estrada. Any of those are fine with me. I mean, really, any combination of those guys fighting. The fight that I really want to see in 2017 is Miura against Salido, because that was supposed to happen. It got cancelled, and I really hope they can remake it, because I think that's fight of the year, almost guaranteed. That would be my pick. Is there anything sort of beyond the obvious ones that sticks out for you?
Well, obviously, I mean, if Kovalev Stevenson is ever going to happen, I hope it happens this year. It's probably never going to happen, but wishful thinking, I can hope for it. I'd like to see Deontay Wilder fight someone. I know the Povetkin thing wasn't his fault at all, you know, but it's just disappointing what's happened and how he still hasn't really fought anyone. I mean, Berman Staverns' best win, and Staverns really only ever beaten Areola.
Yeah.
So that's really
Would you like
not
to
that
see
great.
Wilder against the Joshua Klitschko winner?
Yeah,
That's the obvious one,
absolutely.
isn't it?
Yeah, Parker too, or Luis Ortiz, but that's not going to happen.
Oh, well, yeah, the one that has been talked about is Parker against Wilder. Again, I don't know if that's just talk, but Wilder has said several times in interviews that he wants that fight. And I think, if I'm Parker and I'm thinking, right, what's the easiest way to a unification? I'd fancy Wilder over Joshua or Klitschko, I think, if I'm, thinking of my own chances. I think all of them would beat Parker.
Yeah, I think I agree.
I wasn't impressed with the Ruiz fight. I finally watched it about 10 days ago, and I thought it was really a case of Ruiz sort of throwing it away in a sense of, just, like you said with Uchiyama, he just didn't throw enough. I think Ruiz had him there, but yeah, it was a strange one.
Yeah, the thing I really didn't like about Parker in that fight was he came in fat. Like he was 10 pounds over what he normally weighs in, and he kind of, had a bit of a gut going on, and it wasn't a good look. I don't know why.
No, and he'd been in good shape for fights before that, hadn't he? I remember
Yeah,
who was it against? Who's the guy he beat? The one who fought Mike Perez.
Takam.
Yeah, Takam. He was in good shape for Takam. I remember that, and he looked strong, and he was tired in that fight, but he came through it, and he was, the fat Parker, I think, may have got knocked out by Takam because, Takam put a lot of pressure on him, and I think that Ruiz kind of threw it away by not putting foot to the gas a bit more in the mid rounds. It was a shame. Although I don't think Ruiz is as bad as some people say. I do think he's got something to offer the division. Maybe Ruiz against a guy like Takam would be a good one. Maybe Tyson Fury's comeback fight, a guy like Ruiz, wouldn't be a bad opponent. Yeah, we'll see. I mean, there's fights to be made. I'm just trying to think if there are any other sort of hipster fights that I'd like to see. I mean, I'd love to see O'Hara Davis against Josh Taylor. I think that would be a phenomenal sort of old school British level fight where the winner would be right on track to go off and fight for world titles. But obviously, boxing being what it is, that wouldn't happen unless there was the title on the line. And it's a shame. I think Eddie Hearn's pretty much confirmed it. He said, that fight will happen a few years down the road. When there's a belt on the line and there's a bit more money. But that's one I'd really like to see because I think the winner would be a significant notch on the winner's belt. Yeah, any others you can think of before we go? I'll do the 6 degrees of Tony Dodson in a second. I've got the answer up.
Just towards the future, I think a future fight between Paddy Barnes and Andrew Selby, that'd be really good. And both guys have a profile. I mean, Barnes just started out as a pro, but especially in Belfast, he has a big profile, and Selby in Wales and the amateur career on the GB squad. I think that'd be a really good fight, and I think both of those guys are, already some of the better fighters at flyweight, even with as many fights as they have. Just on their ability and amateur pedigree alone, I think they're up there already, and they want to move fast. So I think that'd be a good fight.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Selby needs opponents, doesn't he? He's been saying that for a while. Although I'm not quite as high on Selby as some of the others are in the UK. I do think he's a very good fighter, but I'm going to do another Valdez. I'm going to keep my powder dry on him for a while and wait to be convinced because I don't want to sort of jump the gun. But yeah, let's just finish with the Tony Dodson one because I've actually had quite a few good answers to this, most of which went via the Antonio DeMarco route. And obviously he's Valera's most famous opponent, but that's a red herring. So to anyone listening, you should not have gone via DeMarco. That's not the quickest way to do it. The way I've done it was John Wayne Hibbert fought Martin Gethin. Martin Gethin fought Ahmed Diaz in 2012 or so. Ahmed Diaz was in the same division as Valero for years and years. They both fought a guy named Takahiro Shimada, one fight after each other. Shimada fought Valero and got knocked out, and then Shimada knocked out Diaz the fight after that. So they were one fight removed. So you go Hibbert, Gethin, Diaz, Shimada, Valero. So that's how you do it in 4 steps. One of the best punches of all time to an absolute bum in 4 fights. Brilliant. That's the name of the game. If anyone could think of any for 6 Degrees of Tony Dodson in the future, do let me know, because they're great fun to come up with different routes. We had a number of different ones through for tonight's, but none of which could do it in 4 or less, unfortunately. So once again, I've beaten all of you. Ryan, mate, unless there's anything else you want to say, we can wrap this up. But would love to get you back on at some point in the future, because like you say, I think having a sort of smaller number of people works really well, and it's good to have a sort of more in-depth one-on-one chat, I think, every so often. So you'll be watching DeGale versus Jack, but probably not the Lara Foreman card then.
I mean, I'll watch it anyway.
You're going to watch both, aren't you? Terrible.
Because I do have Spike TV over here, and Showtime actually doesn't exist in Canada, so I have to stream that fight.
I'll give you my Box Nation login or something. I think we're getting that on Box Nation. I might be wrong, or is it on Sky? Actually, it might be.
Oh, it's probably on Sky.
Yeah,
Sky, because of Eddie Hearn and DeGale.
Yeah, let me double check. Yeah, it's on Sky. Oh, I might have to. I've discovered this new service where you can get Sky for 24 hours for something like about the equivalent of about $5, and I occasionally do that on a Saturday just to get it overnight. Yeah, I might have to do that. I've got to stay loyal to DeGale, my favourite British fighter. But yeah, anyway, Ryan, thank you very much for taking the time out and joining us, and hope to get you back on again soon.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, man.